Okay, so have you ever noticed how prepping for the IELTS speaking test can feel like you're about to go on stage?
Hmm.
It's kind of like this big performance where you have to prove you've got a handle on the English language.
Oh, definitely.
And, for a lot of people, it's the most stressful part of that whole IELTS exam.
That makes sense. I can see why.
But the good news is that this test isn't about being some perfect English-speaking robot.
Right?
It's more about showing that you can handle real conversations out there in the world,
Exactly. It's about being able to communicate.
like whether you're talking about your favorite hobbies or,
Mm.
some really complex global issue. So to kick things off, could you give us a breakdown of what this IELTS speaking test actually looks like?
Sure. So the IELTS speaking test has three parts,
Okay.
and each one is designed to test you on different ways you use spoken English. The first part is kind of like a warm up.
I like it, a warm-up.
So it's like a 4 or 5 minute chat with the examiner,
Okay.
and they'll ask you about things that are familiar to you.
So like the classic tell me about yourself kind of deal.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing it's not as simple as just sharing your favorite color and what your cat's name is?
It's a little more than that.
Right.
Yeah, so while it might seem pretty casual, the examiner's actually listening for some pretty specific things,
Okay.
like how well you can give detailed answers or the range of vocabulary that you use,
Gotcha.
and even whether you can speak fluently without, hesitating too much.
Yeah,
It's all about showing off those conversational skills, even though it's a slightly formal setting.
that makes sense. So if they ask me about my hobbies,
Uh-huh.
I shouldn't just say, oh, I like reading. I
Yeah.
need to give them a little more to work with.
You got it. So instead of just saying reading,
Hmm.
you could say something like, I'm really into historical fiction, especially anything set in ancient Rome.
Ooh, good example.
Yeah, like I just finished reading I, Claudius, and it completely changed how I thought about that whole period of history.
Okay, so details, vocabulary, maybe a little bit of storytelling.
Yep.
All right, so we've gone through the initial chit chat. What happens next?
All right, so then we move on to part two,
Okay.
and this is where things get a little bit more intense.
Oh.
So in this part, you get a topic card
Okay.
as a specific theme on it.
Right.
You get 1 minute to prep a short talk,
Oh, wow.
then you have 2 minutes to give that talk to the examiner, and they won't interrupt you.
Whoa. Okay, so it's like a mini presentation.
Exactly.
Is there like a time limit or
You've
something?
got 2 minutes to speak.
2 minutes. All right.
And the topics, they can be all over the place, but they're usually pretty relatable.
Okay.
And it's really about you showing that you can organize your thoughts and speak clearly for, a little while.
So it's less about perfect grammar and more about communication.
Exactly.
I can see how that would make some people nervous, though, right? You
Yep.
only have 1 minute to like gather your thoughts and then plan a whole 2 minute speech.
Right.
Any tips on how to like make the most of that prep time?
Definitely. Definitely. So that 1 minute is super important.
Okay.
Don't waste it by trying to write a whole script in your head.
Okay.
Instead, just jot down a couple of key points, maybe like a really quick outline, and a few key words that'll help keep you on track.
Right, like a little roadmap.
Okay. You really just want to have a nice, clear structure for your little talk.
Okay, that's a good point. I tend to overthink things and want to be like too perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So having a simple structure to follow would probably help keep me, calmer and focused.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've had our little chat, we've given our mini presentation. What's next? Is there a grand finale?
Yes, there is a grand finale.
Okay, hit me.
The third part of the test is basically a deeper discussion with the examiner.
All right.
It kind of builds on that theme from part two,
Okay.
and it usually lasts about 4 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
So, for example, if your topic in part two was about how important it is to learn new skills,
Mm.
part three might dig into bigger questions about, like, education systems or how technology is changing how we learn.
So the questions in part 3 are more like
Yeah.
they're designed to see if you can, express your opinions, analyze things, and
Cool.
like back up your viewpoints with reasons and examples.
Check it.
So it's about showing you can handle like
Yeah.
more complex ideas and have a thoughtful conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, so the stakes are higher in part 3.
A little bit, yeah.
It sounds like the examiner's looking for that critical thinking, not just like surface level answers.
Yeah, they want to see that you can, think about things on a deeper level.
Okay, so how exactly are we being judged on all of this?
Yeah.
What are they listening for throughout this whole speaking test?
Well, there are four main criteria that the examiners are going to use to score how well you do.
Okay.
And they listen for these in all three parts of the test.
Okay, so it's not just about one specific section.
It's all the way through.
All right, lay it on us. What are these 4 mysterious criteria?
These mystical judging criteria.
Yeah, spill a tea.
All right, I will. All right, so the first one is fluency and coherence.
Okay, fluency and coherence.
This is all about how smoothly and clearly you can get your ideas across. It's not about talking super fast.
Okay.
It's more about making those connections between your thoughts in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Using linking words and phrases well.
So like a well-structured story.
Yeah,
It's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if it's just like a quick answer to a question.
exactly. The examiner wants to see that you can put your thoughts together even when you're under pressure.
Right.
And they'll even pay attention to, like, how you use pauses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a well-placed pause can actually help you sound more fluent.
Okay.
It gives you a little time to think and lets the listener process what you've just said.
That's actually a relief to hear.
Yeah.
I tend to like pause a lot when I'm talking, especially if I'm trying to be careful with my grammar.
Right?
I was kind of worried that would count against me.
No, it's fine. As long as those pauses feel natural,
Mm-hmm.
and like they have a purpose,
Gotcha.
they're not going to be a problem. It's when you get stuck in those ums and ahs that it starts to affect how fluent you sound.
Okay, that's good to know. So what's the next criteria then?
Okay, so next up is lexical resource,
Lexical resource.
which basically means vocabulary.
A vocabulary.
But it's not just about using the biggest, fanciest words you can find.
Right. Okay.
It's more about picking the right words that fit what you're talking about
Gotcha.
and showing that you have a good variety of words that you can use.
So it's not about trying to sound super smart.
Not at all.
It's more about choosing words that fit the context.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to sound like you're trying too hard
Right,
and
yeah.
impress them with words that you don't even really understand.
Okay, so how do you actually build up that lexical resource?
Yeah,
Is it just memorizing tons of words?
definitely not. The best way to build your vocabulary is to engage with all kinds of different English materials.
Okay.
Books, articles, podcasts, documentaries, even just talking to native speakers.
Okay.
And the key is to focus on topics that really interest you.
So if I'm really into like environmental science,
Yeah.
I should read articles about that, watch documentaries.
Exactly.
Okay.
You'll naturally start picking up the vocabulary that's related to that field.
That's way more fun than just like staring at flashcards all day.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got fluency and coherence, lexical resource. What else are they judging us on?
All right. Next up is grammatical range and accuracy.
Grammatical range and accuracy. Ooh, that sounds a little scary.
I know, right? It's the one everyone worries about.
I was kind of dreading this one.
I know.
I definitely make grammar mistakes, especially when I'm nervous. Is that
Ah.
going to, like, completely ruin my score?
No. The examiner knows that everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers.
Even native speakers, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really about the overall impression they get.
Okay.
They want to see that you can generally use grammar correctly and that you're not making the same, little mistakes over and over.
So it's not about being perfect.
No.
It's more about showing that you have a solid foundation.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better.
Yeah.
All right, what's the final criterion then?
Last but not least, we have pronunciation.
Pronunciation. Okay.
And remember, this doesn't mean you need to sound like you were born and raised in London or New York.
Okay, good.
It's more about being clear. Can the examiner understand what you're saying without having to, really concentrate or ask you to repeat yourself?
Right, so if you have, like, a strong regional accent,
Mm-hmm.
that's totally fine as long as you're enunciating clearly.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's more about how you articulate your words, having natural intonation, and making sure you're putting the emphasis on the right parts of the words.
Word stress, right?
Yes, exactly.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, and you can practice all of this by listening to native speakers and kind of mimicking how they say things.
So listening is key.
Listening is key.
All right, so we've got our 4 horsemen of the IELTS speaking apocalypse.
The 4 horsemen.
Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation.
There you go.
Now that we know what they're looking for, let's talk about how to actually impress them.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that each part of the test has its own challenges and, strategies.
Uh-huh.
So where should we start?
Let's rewind back to part 1, that initial interview.
Okay, back to the warm-up.
Exactly. It's all about making a good first impression and showing that you can handle those basic conversational questions.
Right.
And remember, those questions are usually about pretty familiar topics like your work or your hobbies or your hometown.
So it's like a warm-up round, but with a little IELTS twist.
Yeah.
What kind of IELTS twist are we talking about?
So remember those 4 criteria we just talked about?
Uh-huh.
You want to keep those in mind even when you're answering those basic questions.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we take like everyday topics and turn them into those super impressive IELTS answers?
Think about adding in some details, maybe giving some examples that'll really show off your vocabulary and how fluently you can speak.
Okay.
So for instance, if they ask you about your job, don't just say, I'm a teacher.
Right.
Tell them what you teach, what you enjoy about it, maybe even a memorable experience you've had with a student.
Right. So instead of just saying, I like to travel, I could say something like, I love exploring different cultures and trying new foods.
Yes.
Last year, I went to Thailand, and like the whole experience of seeing ancient temples and eating authentic street food was just mind blowing.
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
You've taken a really simple answer and made it much more engaging and interesting to listen to.
I'm starting to see how this works.
Yeah.
So part one is all about being yourself, but with that extra layer of detail and vocabulary.
Exactly.
Okay, what about part two, that dreaded long turn?
Oh yeah, part 2.
I'm still a little intimidated by that whole topic card thing.
Don't worry, we'll break it down and make it less scary.
Okay, good.
So remember, you get that 1 minute to prep.
Yes.
You have to use it wisely.
Okay.
Don't try to write out your whole speech.
Okay.
Just jot down a few key words and a really simple outline. That'll be enough to guide you.
Right, so like a roadmap, not a full-on essay.
Exactly.
Got it. But what if the topic is something I just like totally don't know anything about?
Well, usually the topics are pretty general and relatable.
Okay.
And even if you don't have like personal experience with that specific topic, you can always use your general knowledge,
Oh, right.
what you think about things, even your imagination.
Okay, that's good to know. So I don't need to panic if I get a topic that seems totally out of left field.
Not at all.
All right, so let's say I've got my keywords, I've got my mini outline ready to go. Any tips for like actually delivering that 2-minute talk?
Yeah, remember, it's not just about reciting information.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with the examiner, almost like you're telling a story. Use your voice to show that you're enthusiastic and you're actually interested in what you're talking about.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to let your personality shine through a little bit.
So it's kind of like a mini performance?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't want to sound too rehearsed, like you're reading from a script.
Right, right, yeah. How do you find that balance?
Practice, practice, practice.
Practice makes perfect.
Exactly. Record yourself doing some practice talks, and then listen back to how you sound.
Okay.
Are you speaking clearly? Are you going at a natural pace? Are you using a variety of vocabulary and different grammatical structures?
Okay.
Are you genuinely engaged with a topic? The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll feel and the more natural you'll sound.
Right, and it'll be less terrifying.
That's terrifying, yeah.
Okay, so we've tackled part one, we've survived part two. What about part three, that in-depth discussion?
Okay, part 3.
Is this where things get, like, really challenging?
Part 3 is designed to push you a little further. See how you handle more complex ideas, those more abstract questions.
Right.
But it's still a conversation.
Okay.
The examiner actually wants to hear your thoughts and opinions,
Okay.
even if they're different from their own.
So don't be afraid to express yourself.
No, don't be afraid.
And have a real discussion, even if it gets a little, philosophical.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing there are still some, like, do's and don'ts for part three.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, are there certain types of answers that are going to impress the examiner more than others?
For sure. In part 3, they're looking for more than just like a simple yes or no.
Okay, so more than one-word answers.
They want to see that you can explain your ideas, give reasons, and provide examples.
So show them you can think critically and explain your thoughts in a sophisticated way.
Exactly.
Are there any, like, specific techniques or strategies that can help with that?
One helpful trick is to structure your answers, kind of like mini arguments.
Many arguments.
So you clearly state your opinion,
Right.
then give 1 or 2 reasons why you think that, and then back it up with a relevant example or an anecdote.
Okay, so instead of just saying, I think technology is changing how we learn,
Yeah.
I might say something like, I think technology is having a huge impact on education. For example, online learning platforms are giving more people around the world access to education. And interactive simulations are allowing students to experience complex concepts in a much more immersive way.
Perfect. That's exactly what I mean.
Good.
You've taken a general statement and turned it into a well-supported argument. And you've used some really great vocabulary while doing it.
Okay, I'm feeling more confident about part three already.
Good.
Before we move on to, like, the common mistakes that people make, is there anything else about part three that we should know about? Any, like, secret tips or tricks?
One thing to remember is that the examiner might challenge what you say.
Oh, really?
or ask you to think about a different point of view.
Okay.
But they're not trying to, like, start an argument with you.
Yeah, okay.
They're just trying to see if you can think critically
Yeah.
and defend your position.
So don't take it personally if they're, like, playing devil's advocate or pushing back on my ideas.
Exactly. It's all part of the test.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to disagree with them,
Okay.
respectfully, of course, or to offer a different perspective.
All right.
They're really looking for that critical thinking, not just agreement.
That's a good point. It's easy to get flustered when someone disagrees with you. And in this case, it's actually a good sign.
It means they're listening.
Yeah.
And they're giving you a chance to really show off those analytical skills.
So it's about showing that you can have a mature discussion and really present your ideas in a clear and persuasive way.
Exactly.
This is all super helpful. Okay, so we've covered the 3 parts of the test, the 4 key criteria, but I know there are also some common pitfalls that people fall into during this IELTS speaking test.
Oh, yeah.
Let's dive into those so our listeners can avoid making those mistakes and really boost their chances of success.
Let's do it.
So what are those common mistakes we should be watching out for?
Well, one of the most common ones is like overusing those filler words.
Filler words.
You know, things like,
Yeah.
we all use them in everyday conversation, but in a formal test, they can make you sound a little, well, hesitant and less fluent.
Yeah, I can definitely see that I'm guilty of that one myself.
Oh, we all are.
Especially when I'm, nervous or trying to come up with the right word.
Right. It happens.
Any tips on how to break that habit?
So the key is awareness.
Yeah.
Start paying attention to how you speak.
Okay.
Record yourself doing some practice IELTS answers and then listen back.
Okay.
And once you kind of know what your filler word patterns are, you can start to consciously replace them with pauses.
Okay. Strategic silence.
Exactly. So instead of saying, I think technology is changing the way we learn, just take a little breath and say, technology is changing the way we learn.
So it's like hitting the reset button in your brain.
Right.
Okay, I like that. What other mistakes should we be trying to avoid?
Another big one is relying too much on memorized answers.
Oh, yeah.
It's tempting to try to script everything out in advance.
Right.
But honestly, the examiner can usually tell.
They can sense it.
Yeah, and it can make your answers sound kind of unnatural.
Right, or like they don't really fit the question.
Exactly. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
That's a good way to put it.
So remember, this test is all about how well you can communicate spontaneously.
Right, so go with the flow.
Embrace it. Prepare some ideas and key phrases, but don't try to memorize whole answers.
So be prepared, but be flexible.
Exactly.
What about pronunciation? We talked about not needing a perfect native accent, but are there any other, pronunciation traps we should be aware of?
Yeah, one common problem is misplacing stress in words.
Stress in words.
So in English, we emphasize certain syllables in a word more than others.
Right.
And if you put the stress on the wrong syllable, it can change the meaning of the word or make it hard to understand.
Oh, interesting. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like music. If you hit the wrong note, it throws off the whole melody.
I like that analogy. Makes sense.
But the good news is you can practice word stress by listening to native speakers.
Okay.
Pay attention to how they pronounce words, and there are a ton of online resources that can help you with that too.
Okay, so word stress is important. What about how long our answers should be? Is there such a thing as being too brief on the IELTS speaking test?
Oh yeah, for sure. While you don't want to ramble on forever, if you give those really short one-word answers, it's definitely going to hurt your score.
Okay.
Remember, the examiner wants to see that you can develop your thoughts, give details, and use a good variety of vocabulary and grammar.
So it's about finding that balance between being concise, but also being comprehensive.
Yeah, I like that. Think of it like, you want to give them the meat and potatoes, but maybe you can skip the dessert this time.
That's a perfect analogy. Okay, what about speaking speed? Should we try to talk really fast to show that we're fluent, or is it better to slow down and focus on being clear?
A lot of people think they need to speak quickly to sound fluent, especially when they're nervous.
Yeah, makes sense.
But actually, that's a really common mistake. Fluency isn't about speed. It's about being clear and having that smooth delivery.
Right.
If you talk too fast, the examiner might miss something important. Or they might have to ask you to repeat yourself, which can break up the flow of the conversation.
So it's better to maybe err on the side of caution and speak a little bit slower?
Especially if you tend to get tongue-tied when you're under pressure.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people.
Focus on pronouncing your words clearly and pausing naturally between your thoughts.
So it's like a good song. It needs those spaces and silences to breathe.
Exactly. It makes the whole thing more impactful.
Love that analogy, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've talked about some of the common IELTS speaking myths. We've given our listeners some strategies for each part of the test, and we've highlighted those pitfalls to avoid. So, feeling empowered yet?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Confidence is key. Believe in yourself and your ability to communicate in English. And don't be afraid to let your personality come through. It's just a conversation after all.
A conversation with high stakes, but yeah, just a conversation. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the IELTS speaking test, is there one final, thought-provoking question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something to kind of chew on as they continue on their IELTS journey?
We talked a lot about how important it is to learn new skills and how the world is constantly changing, right? So here's something to think about. What skills do you think will be most important for success in the future? And how can you start developing those skills now?
That's a great question. Definitely something to reflect on. And listener, as you're getting ready for this IELTS speaking test, remember, you've got this. We believe in you, and we can't wait to hear about your success stories.